Chapter 1092. Expeditious retreat. The battle was over, but the soldiers had no time to relax and celebrate their victory. They did not even have time to collect the soul shards and other spoils from the army of slain abominations. Instead, as soon as the fighting ended, everyone got busy preparing for an immediate retreat. That was the nature of the war in Antarctica. No matter what terrible of a foe you defeated, a dozen more were just beyond the horizon. They were in enemy territory. The ferocious battle against the skull centipede had not taken a lot of time, but it had created a lot of noise. Already, several hordes of nightmare creatures were flowing across the plain, converging on the location where the battle had taken place. Unless the expedition force wanted to drown in an endless flood of abominations, it needed to disappear as soon as possible. Sunny, Jet, Effie, and Kai were gathered in front of the skull centipede's massive corpse, careful to steer clear of the water. They did not know what the poison was exactly, but the river was visibly tainted. Even in death, the corrupted tyrant continued to spread death and destruction. They had just retrieved the 5 transcendent soul shards from the ghastly carcass. That was the extent of the trophies the expedition force was going to carry back with it. The huntress looked at the hundreds of dead abominations laying on the ground and sighed. Damn, what a pity. That would be enough for an entire cohort of sleepers to saturate their cores. Sunny felt a bit regretful too. The monetary value of all these shards would have been astronomical, granted, now that the chain of nightmare had flooded the waking world with abominations. The price of shards was not what it had been before. He knew it from his occasional correspondence with Aiko. He shook his head. That might be true, but what's the use of having all these shards if we die before reaching a siege capital? Kai nodded. Indeed. We have already reaped the main benefit, preventing the tyrant from growing stronger and reaching one of the human settlements. Our casualties were light, too. That's a win in my book. Anything else is irrelevant. Sunny knew that his friend was right, but nevertheless he could not help but sigh with regret. At least his luck had been good, granting him several ascended memories. None seemed particularly useful, so he promptly fed them to Nightmare. That was already a good result for one day. After a short pause, Sunny said, "In any case, good job, everyone. That went much smoother than I thought it would. Especially you, Kai. That was an insane shot." Sunny knew a thing or two about archery. Shooting an arrow through a thin crack in the skull of a moving target while flying at high speed, that was one for the books. The charming archer had been the one to destroy the skeletal trees as well. Kai smiled shyly. "Thank you. To be honest, I can't quite believe it. I never thought that I would kill a corrupted tyrant one day." His green eyes turned slightly wistful, as if he was recalling the past. Sunny blinked a couple of times. "What on earth are you talking about? Can't believe it," says the guy who jumped into the mouth of a dragon to kill it. Kai coughed, while Jet glanced at him and raised an eyebrow. "A dragon? What kind of a dragon are we talking about?" The archer shook his head. "It was just a transformed saint, in the nightmare." This time it was Soul Reaper's turn to blink. "Ascended Nightingale killed a saint." Her voice sounded a little dull. Effie suddenly laughed. "What about it? I killed one too, a huge pain of a bastard, and that one." She pointed at Sunny. "He actually killed the same saint twice. Speak about holding grudges." Jet rubbed the back of her neck with a neutral expression. And I thought my second nightmare was exciting." At that moment, Kai turned his head slightly, as if listening to something. He was most likely receiving a message through his comm. And indeed, a few moments later, he called out to them. "Everything is ready. We can depart in 3 minutes." Sunny let out a relieved sigh. The 2 companies had been quick to organize themselves for a rapid march, and so they would be able to leave before any of the migrating hordes arrived. Kai looked at Sunny and Jet, then at Effie. Then he asked hesitantly, "Oh, are we going to take my ride or yours?" Effie scoffed. "Does it matter?" She grinned and answered her own question a moment later. "Of course it matters. Do you think that I don't know how pampered you are by your soldiers? That guy, it's really unfair. He has a fan club even in the army. They bring him all kinds of little gifts, including snacks and sweets. So I think we need to celebrate, and I think you're treating." Kai looked away in embarrassment. Those aren't gifts. People are just concerned about their commander. I can't really refuse either. They become sad if I do. Sunny grinned. Whatever you say. The archer shook his head. All right, then we will ride in my APC. We can work on compiling a report for Army Command in the process, too. With nothing more to discuss, they hurried to leave the scene of the battle. Riding a personnel carrier at the head of a column of soldiers made Sunny remember the cold, dark days in the Antarctic center. Granted, Kai's APC was a little shabby when compared to the robust, beautiful Rhino. Still, it got the job done, and the charming archer really had some delicious stuff squirreled away in the nooks and crannies of the heavy machine. The expedition force left the ravaged river shore behind and rushed across the plain, escaping the approaching mass of nightmare creatures. They masterfully navigated the landscape, avoiding the wandering swarms and keeping out of sight as well as they could. The column had to fight off a few packs of abominations, but these skirmishes were too inconsequential to pay them any attention. Things like that were unavoidable when a large force traveled across Antarctica. Everything was going well. But of course, it had not gone well for long. At some point, the loud sound of an emergency message rolled through the interior of the APC. Sunny looked up and turned to the communication terminal, frowning. As soon as the damned thing lit up, he knew that something had gone really, really wrong. The APC was a little cramped, but the four masters were able to make themselves comfortable. They were sitting on empty ammunition crates, enjoying some of the snacks Kai had presented them with. The mood in the interior of the armored vehicle was surprisingly relaxed, and the awakened crew under the archer's command were respectfully giving them some space. Effie was talking. Wait, what? That is hilarious." The conversation had taken a random turn, leading to Kai sharing the details of how he and Sunny first met. At the time, one of them had been imprisoned in a deep well, while the other had gone more than a little feral after living alone in the dark city. The huntress knew what had happened in broad strokes, but this was her first time hearing the full story. She couldn't stop laughing. "I can just imagine it." Effie wiped her eyes, then glanced at Jet and asked with curiosity, "What about you, Colonel? How did you become Sunny's fairy godmother?" Soul Reaper smiled, leaning back with a can of a refreshing beverage in her hand. "What's a fairy grandmother? Is it some kind of nightmare creature?" Effie stared at her for a few moments, then shook her head despondently. "What's a fairy go? Damn, they really are two peas in the same pod." Jet chuckled. "I guess not. Well, there's not much of a story. I've been assigned to hold vigil over an aspirant, and that aspirant turned out to be Sunny. It's rare for us kids from the outskirts to survive the first nightmare, so I kept in touch." Sunny let out a relieved sigh when he realized that she wasn't going to describe the exact moment he had woken up, and what transpired right after. There was no need to give Effie more ammunition. If Jet spilled the beans, he would never hear the end of it. He opened his mouth to change the topic, but at that moment, the sound of an urgent message resounded in the interior of the APC. Sunny did not like that sound at all. Looking up at the communication terminal, he frowned. Almost at the same time, his own comm vibrated, receiving a message as well. As Kai rose to access the terminal, the other three checked their comms. The messages Sunny and Jet had received were probably a little different, since the Special Reconnaissance Unit was privy to more information, but the gist of it was the same. Damnation! Sonny glanced at his friends, reading the same somber tension on their faces. The chain of nightmares had just gone into another period of rapid escalation. Dozens of gates had opened across East Antarctica at the same time, and the initial readings showed that most, if not all of them, were of the third category. Much worse, it had already been confirmed that several Titans had emerged, ready to wreak havoc across the continent. Even though the Three Saint had slayed several such creatures in the past months, the situation was still eerily similar to what had happened in the Antarctic Center. Would the entirety of the evacuation army be able to handle the sudden crisis? Sonny was not sure. Their chances were much higher than what the Antarctic Center contingents had been, but still. Things had just gone from bad to worse. Jet sighed. More Titans, huh? I wonder if any of them are corrupted. Effie continued to munch on her snack, seemingly unbothered by the dire news. She simply shrugged. We'll find out soon enough. There is no point in worrying about it now, is there? Soul Reaper grinned. True, well, unless one of those Titans happened to appear right between us and the siege capital. The Huntress suddenly stopped chewing, which was very abnormal behavior in her case, and glared at Jet silently. Colonel Jet, you just had to go and say it, didn't you? At that moment, Kai returned from the terminal with a troubled face. He looked at them for a few moments, then sighed. There has been a change of plans. The path we were supposed to take back is no longer available, so Army Command sent orders to reroute the expedition force. We will be retreating to a different city, to be stationed there until further notice. Effie sighed and shook her head despondently. See. Sonny and Jet glanced at each other. They had not received new orders, so the SRU still expected them to accompany the two companies. That was a relief. Kai turned to them and forced out a smile. Sonny, ascended Jet, we will have to trouble you with helping us navigate the wilderness, as well as provide help to our scouts. I hope you don't mind. If everything goes well, we'll be behind walls in 3 days. Sonny looked around. Why would we mind? This is like a luxury hotel. I haven't been fed this much delicious stuff in a while. A small smile appeared on his face. Kai nodded. Great, then please excuse me. I'll go arrange for the column to change course. He went back to the communication terminal, leaving the three of them alone. Sonny sighed, the smile disappearing from his face. This is it then, a perfect moment. 2 days passed in a tense but manageable atmosphere. The expedition force was persisting in its march, traversing the Great Plains of East Antarctica with acceptable speed. The skirmishes they fought increased in frequency and ferocity, but with Sonny's shadows scouting out the way, they were able to escape major battles. The rest of the continent was not doing as well. East Antarctica was in turmoil, with the assaults on the siege capitals growing more dreadful every day. The evacuation army was holding for now, but the future seemed grim. At the same time, the Saint had united to face the rampaging Titans. Their battle had lasted for several ruinous hours and ended in a bitter draw. 2 of the Titans perished, but the Transcendent had to retreat, each sustaining heavy wounds. Several more creatures remained, including one confirmed corrupted Titan. For now, none of them was actively moving toward the siege capitals. But it was only a matter of time. Bad, this smells really bad. Sonny was at the back of Kai's APC, sitting on a crate with his eyes closed. His shadows were out scouting, and Jet was sleeping on a neighboring crate, using a military coat as a blanket. Suddenly, her communicator produced a melodic sound. Since it was not a notification from Army Command, Sonny paid it no attention. Soul Reaper, however, sat up, yawned, and glanced at the message with a sullen expression. She remained silent for a few moments. then grimaced and showed him the screen of the communicator. Sonny opened his eyes and read the title of a government propaganda article attached to the message. His eyes turned a little darker. The title read, "The Great Legacy Clans announce full support for the Southern Quadrant evacuation effort. In humanity's hour of need, its greatest warriors are rising against the forces of the Nightmare Spell. The best of Bastion and Ravenheart are already en route to reinforce the valiant soldiers of the evacuation army." Sonny remained silent for a long time, then leaned back with a sigh. His thoughts were dark and heavy. Deep in his heart, an ember of anger smoldered, divorced from all reason, pushing him to do dangerous and short-sighted things. It was almost as if the sin of Solace was whispering into his ears. Kill them all. How hard would it be to simply kill them all? Probably not much easier than slaying the winter beast, and with much more dire consequences. Shaking his head, he looked at Jet. They had never spoken about it directly, but she definitely knew the real reason why the great clans were coming to Antarctica. After all, Soul Reaper had a much more extensive information network. She was deeply embedded into the hierarchy of the government and had a personal connection to some of its leaders. Of course, the government was only a second-rate player in the grand scheme of things. Still, they played an important role, and as such, had access to a lot of secrets. He lingered for a few moments. "What do you think will happen now?" Jet covered her mouth with a hand, yawned, and then smiled. "Right now? Well, let me think. I guess the first thing that will happen is that I am going to receive a message from the old man." Just as she finished the sentence, her communicator lit up, displaying a new notification. Soul Reaper chuckled quietly, then concentrated on the screen of the military-issue device. "See, it's a curse to always be right. Give me a minute." Sonny waited for her to finish reading the important message, and it was important indeed. The old man Jet had mentioned was none other than Saint Cor, the Wake of Ruin, one of the two government transcendents. Sonny had met him briefly after coming to East Antarctica, and the man definitely left an impression. Wake of Ruin was a tall, gaunt man in his late 50s. Although his skin was showing signs of aging, his hair still remained perfectly black, like the feathers of a raven. The saint had sharp features, a piercing gaze, and a stern demeanor, acting like a person who was used to both wielding power and bearing responsibility. Wherever he went, a slightly sweet, sickening scent followed. Sonny was intimately familiar with that scent. It reminded him of the smell of the battlefield, or rather, of what remained after the battle was over. Saint Cor was not a likable person. However, it was hard not to feel respect toward him. The government transcendent was not as renowned and awesome as the saints of the legacy clans. In fact, for a saint, he was strangely low-key. But his age alone told volumes about what kind of man he was, and what ordeals he had lived through. Wake of Ruin was not quite in the same league as the legendary figures like Immortal Flame and Nightwalker, since he had been a young child when the spell first descended. However, he was still a member of the first generation, and as such had watched and helped build the world order of today. Even if Saint Cor had become transcendent later than the members of the second generation like Anvil and Kai Song, he was still, in a sense, their elder. Sonny did not know what the arrangement between the government and the great clans was exactly, but the mere fact that Wake of Ruin was allowed to be the exclusion from the rule, and did not serve any of the sovereigns hinted that there was more to the old man than appeared on the surface. He was the field commander of the whole Antarctica operation, and Jet seemed to enjoy quite a close relationship with the veteran saint. She was one of his most trusted agents, so it wasn't a surprise that Soul Reaper would be one of the first people to be contacted by Wake of Ruin after the news of the legacy forces coming to the southern quadrant were made public. Lucky me. Sonny did not have close ties to the upper echelons of the government, but as Soul Reaper's confidant, he would be privy to the vital information almost as soon as she. Come to think of it, he also had eyes and ears inside Valor thanks to Nephi's and Cassie, and enjoyed the friendship of one of the heirs of the House of Night. He even had a bond with Saint Bloodwave and was friendly with the White Feather clan. I guess I am better connected than I thought I was. And that was without even considering his venerated status in the evacuation army. Waiting for Jet to finish reading the message, Sonny grinned. Maybe I should seduce one of Seishin's sisters, just to complete the trifecta. Those women from the great clan Song, Kai Song's adopted daughters, were all a bit scary though. Well, there's Mordred as well. The naughty shadow gave him a sly glance, making Sonny blink a couple of times. What the hell are you on about? I didn't mean it that way. I was talking about befriending the bastard, not seducing him. The shadow tilted its head. If it had a face, there would have been an innocent smile on its lips and sparks of dubious sincerity in its eyes. Sonny gritted his teeth. Damnation, I've only known you for a couple of days, but I am already starting to regret it. What is wrong with you, miscreant? Look at the other guys. None of them were ever problematic. To prove his point, Sonny gestured in the direction where the other shadows were, diligently scouting out the path for the column. He could vividly imagine their reactions, though. The gloomy shadow would cross its arms, as if trying to say, "Who are you pointing at, you idiot?" The happy shadow would nod energetically, expressing something like, "Of course. We would never cause problems to our master. Master, you're the best," with all its being. The creepy shadow would stare at him with its usual creepy inexpressiveness, but its thoughts would be easy to guess. It would probably be something like, "I wonder what it would feel like to slice the new guy open. What do his insides look like? What is the texture? Do shadows have insides? I want to know." The haughty shadows would wear its usual arrogant look, radiating the "keep me out of this plebeian conversation" peasant feeling with its disdainful pose. The naughty shadow glanced at Sonny with amusement. Sonny sighed. All right, point taken. Eventually, Jet put away her communicator and stared into the distance for a few moments, thinking. Then, she turned to Sonny. He asked, "So what's the word?" Soul Reaper had a contemplative look on her face. "The good news is that we're getting reinforcements. Both Valor and Song are sending strong contingents. 2 saints each, a handful of masters, and a supporting retinue of hundreds of awakened. All of them the absolute elites of the legacy clans, of course, some direct descendants, some loyal retainers. You can imagine how powerful of a force that is." Sonny nodded. Despite his animosity toward the great clans and those legacies that served them, even he had to admit that these people had not ended up in the position of highest power by accident. Legacies were born and bred to be perfect warriors, and in that pursuit, they were ruthless both to their enemies and to themselves. An awakened from a legacy clan was worth their weight in soul shards on the battlefield. It was only when compared to the survivors of the Forgotten Shore that they did not seem that exceptional. But the former dreamers of the Dark City were an abnormality themselves. Hundreds of legacy awakened could achieve a lot in East Antarctica. But whatever they could do paled in comparison to the arrival of 4 more saints. That was the real game changer, more than doubling the number of transcendents present in the southern quadrant in one swoop. With 7 saints leading the charge, the position of the evacuation army would be tremendously bolstered. That was if the newcomers had any intention of helping the evacuation effort along, and not just thwarting it. He looked at Jet with a gloomy expression. "What's the bad news, then?" She shrugged. "Well, you know, the great clans have their own plans. They are going to have to keep up appearances at least, but who knows what they really have in mind." Sonny remained silent for a while, then nodded slowly. "And what is the government going to do about it?" Jet laughed. You really think they would send such information in a message? I mean, the military network is supposed to be protected, but come on. He thought about it, then shook his head. Soul Reaper chuckled. In any case, we'll know more soon. I've been informed that the Legacy forces will be arriving in 2 batches. The second one is already sailing across the ocean, carrying most of them. 2 separate naval convoys, of course. Otherwise, gods know what would happen. She lingered for a moment. The second, smaller batch will be arriving much earlier, though. They'll be here in no more than a couple of days, coming through the dream realm. The vanguard consists of 2 saints and 4 masters, from what I've been told. And what a coincidence, they'll be coming directly to the siege capital we're heading for. Sunny smiled slightly. Is it really a coincidence? Jet shook her head. Of course not. Kor is actually already there, assembling a welcoming party. He kindly requested for me to participate, and he asked me to bring you along. Sunny looked at her with surprise, a frown appearing on his face. What? Wake of Ruin singled me out directly. He raised an eyebrow. Me? Why does he want me, of all people, to be there? I don't even work for the government, really. There are certainly better candidates. Soul Reaper smiled and shook her head. Because you're one of the deadliest masters on the planet, Sunny. And more importantly, you are not affiliated to any of the Legacy clans. At this point, Kor would have to be crazy not to try and use you as an asset. Sunny felt pleased to receive her praise, but not at all happy with the contents of that praise. He leaned back and crossed his arms. And what if I don't want to be used? Jet laughed. Well, you can always go away and live as a hermit in the dream realm. Other than that, my advice is to get comfortable being used. She thought for a bit and then added, but not too comfortable. Make sure to use the people using you in response at least. Sunny blinked a couple of times. What the hell kind of perverse wisdom is that? He scoffed. That's either a very profound or an entirely shameless statement. Soul Reaper grinned. It's probably both. But anyway, that's for the future. We have to get to the siege capital first. And with how things are going, that might be a bit of a problem. Sunny grew serious. Jet was right. For the past 2 days, things went more or less well for the expedition force. But the last day was bound to be the most difficult, because they were leaving the wilderness and approaching the area surrounding a human settlement. By nature of the chain of nightmares, these areas were the most dangerous on the continent. A constant stream of abominations was flowing toward the siege capitals to assault their walls, and the closer one got to a city, the higher the concentration of nightmare creatures was. Fighting a pitched battle was inevitable if the expedition force wanted to reach the gates of the human stronghold. Yeah, let's make sure that everything goes smoothly first. We can worry about legacies later. The immediate task might now have been as grandiose, but it was a priority right now. Jet had given up on sleep, and Sunny felt sufficiently rested. They left their corner of the APC and joined Kai on its roof. The archer was alone, quietly studying a bow made of dark, ashen wood. The weapon radiated an eerie aura of nebulous power, alienation, and lethality. What a dreadful thing. Sunny waved at him. New memory. Kai looked away from the bow and forced out a smile. Yeah, I received it for slaying the malignant grave root. It's a daunting bow to use, to be honest. Sunny wanted to ask to take a look at the ashen bow, but at that moment, a loud roar resounded from somewhere up ahead, and Effie's voice came in through their comms. Damn it, that swarm Sunny scouted an hour ago. They're coming sooner than we expected. Get ready. Sunny, Jet, and Kai glanced at each other, then sighed, summoning their best memories. The last day, indeed, was promising to be really troublesome. They defeated the swarm. However, the smell of the blood attracted a migrating horde, so the expedition force had to fight their way through the flood of nightmare creatures as well. Eventually, the column broke free and escaped into the vast plain, but the peace was short-lived. Very soon, they had to fight another skirmish, which grew into another battle, which grew into an unending onslaught of enemies that threw themselves on the speeding vehicles without reprieve. The mundane soldiers fought admirably. Although not as experienced as the veterans of the First Army, these men and women had also tasted their fair share of bloodshed and strife. Everyone was calm and collected, performing their duties with deadly efficiency and poise. Their performance was immaculate, and their morale seemed unshakable. Was it because the Second Army had not lived through the same hopelessness as the soldiers in the Antarctic Center? Or was it because Effie and Kai were able to inspire them better than Sonny had been able to inspire his soldiers? He was not sure. Regardless, the Wolves and the Nightsingers were a spirited bunch. The Awakened were as resolute as the Mundanes. Although fewer in number, the impact they had on the battlefield was immeasurably higher. All kinds of aspects worked in harmony to create an impenetrable death zone around the column. The abominations that managed to survive it were promptly dispatched by the melee fighters. And of course, the influence of the Four Masters was even greater still. Effie was serving as the vanguard of the expedition force, cutting a bloody path for the vehicles to follow. Her lustrous figure weaved through the mass abominations, leaving devastation in its wake. The bodies of the creatures she killed were left crumbled and broken, as if an invisible colossus had crushed them under its feet as it walked across the vast plain. The blows raining on her sculpted steel body, in turn, rang against metal without ever slowing her down. Kai was soaring high in the sky, observing the rolling battlefield in its entirety and taking out the most dangerous creatures before they could approach the column. His arrows seemed to have a mind of their own, unfailingly slipping through the tiniest cracks in the armor of the abominations. Usually, one arrow was all it took to bring even the most fearsome creature down. His secondary role was to protect the expedition force from the aerial attacks, and in that task, the archer performed admirably as well. Jet was protecting the rear of the column, holding the pursuing enemies back. Her throwing stars fell like iron hail, seemingly numerous. Each carried the same dreadful ability as her melee attacks, striking directly at the soul cores of the abominations. Such a manner of fighting was bound to burn through essence with terrible speed, but that was what made Soul Reaper Jet so frightening of an opponent. As long as she kept killing, her essence would never run out, and in such a furious battle, Jet was free to slaughter as many enemies as she could. And finally, there was Sonny. He was sitting on the roof of an APC with his eyes closed, controlling numerous shadows. All across the column, inky black hands made of darkness appeared out of nowhere to protect the soldiers and press nightmare creatures down into the ground, making them easy to slaughter. For now, there had not been a single casualty thanks to the watchful shadows. Keeping the whole expedition force safe was not easy. In fact, the length of the column was well beyond the reach of his shadow sense, and therefore, out of the area where he could use shadow manifestation. But Sonny was using a little trick. He had stationed his 5 shadows throughout the column, each serving as an island of his consciousness. His senses and his ability to control wild shadows were extended manifold that way. He could summon Saint to help out too, but for now, Sonny was holding back from calling upon the taciturn night. The truth of the matter was that he wanted to keep her existence hidden. More or less, everyone who had learned of their connection in the Antarctic Center were either dead now or could be trusted to keep the secret. Here in East Antarctica, he had mostly acted alone in the wilderness or side by side with Jet, so Saint had not been exposed. The only exception was Song Sation, but she had last seen the taciturn night in the catacombs below the Dark City. Saint had changed a lot since then, both visually and in terms of rank. Connecting her past and present self would be almost impossible. As for the legend of Mongrel, No one knew who he was and where he had come from in the first place. More than that, after the events of Falcon Scott, many people believed that Mongrel had fallen heroically while protecting the last siege capital. From what Sonny had heard, there was already an epic propaganda film about the life and tragic sacrifice of the mysterious swordsman being cooked up back in the NQSC. He shuddered at the thought. In any case, Sonny was handling the battle fine, for now, and he wanted to keep Saint as his hidden ace for a while. That was why he had only summoned her within the sphere of darkness created by the Shadow Lantern during the battle against the malignant Grave Root. Although, I'm not sure if I can keep this up much longer. As the siege capital drew nearer, the onslaught of the nightmare creatures only grew more intense. Sonny was already struggling, and his reserves of essence were swiftly reducing. Something had to change. And soon it did. He smelled it before he felt it. A sweet, sickening scent was suddenly carried over by the wind. Then the battlefield was suddenly shrouded in a vast shadow. Sonny opened his eyes and looked up at the thing that had blotted out the sun. Above them, a myriad of crows filled the sky. There were numerous thousands of them, all circling like a giant whirlwind of darkness. As he watched, the countless crows pivoted with eerie synchronicity and dove down. Their black beaks and vicious talons emanated a sense of deadly sharpness. The myriad of crows was wake of ruin. That was his transformation. What came in the wake of a bloody battle? A swarm of carrion birds. The saint had arrived to guide them into the city personally. Ever since coming to Antarctica, Sonny had been to so many underground strongholds and attended so many meetings in windowless rooms that all of them started to blend together. They all looked the same and felt the same. Even the people inside the room started to seem the same after a while. This time, however, he found himself in a stately and luxurious hall, which was a nice change of pace. The interior was tasteful but lavish. The tall windows let in natural sunlight. The filtered air was cool, crisp, and fresh. What was there not to like? He was relaxing in a comfortable chair, idly waiting for Wake of Ruin to arrive. Jet was nearby, in a similarly laid-back pose. The Transcendent had summoned them immediately after the expedition force had reached the siege capital, and yet he was running late. Neither of them minded. They had barely had time to wash the dirt of the road off themselves before coming to the spacious hall. After weeks spent in the wilderness of East Antarctica, every moment of leisurely peace was like a precious gift. Sonny was lazily thinking about the outcome of the latest battle. After the swarm of crows had descended on the nightmare creatures, hundreds of them were torn apart in an instant, and the slaughter did not stop until the column was safely behind the city walls. The sight of it was frightening and magnificent in equal measure. What a powerful transformation! Of course, he wouldn't go so far as to say that Wake of Ruin's transcendent form was more powerful than that of, for example, Saint Tyrus. Rather, they were best suited for different tasks. The government saint excelled in battles against large numbers of nightmare creatures or potent adversaries that did not possess a lot of physical defense. He was also extremely hard to kill, since that would require exterminating every single one of the myriad of crows, although there would probably be some repercussions for Saint Corps if the swarm sustained heavy losses. Sky Tide, on the other hand, could deliver a much more dire punishment to a single powerful enemy. Her ability to control wind and lightning also made her a more versatile and well-rounded saint. Sonny tried to imagine what would happen if the two transcendents clashed. The mental image of a giant thunderbird being swarmed by a vast whirlwind of black crows in the dark skies was truly an awesome one. Who would win? He was not sure. Saint Tyrus would be at a slight disadvantage due to being robbed of one of her trump cards, true. She often relied on aerial superiority to slay her foes. But then again, Saint Cormac had also been a flying beast. That had not prevented her from tearing off his wyvern head. Jet glanced at Sunny and smiled. "You're thinking about murder again, aren't you?" He turned his head and gave her an impassive look. "Yes, why?" Soul Reaper laughed. "No reason." Sunny studied her with a contemplative expression. Come to think of it, her crow echo was a strange one. Was there perhaps a connection between it and the Saint of Carrion Birds? He wanted to ask, but at that moment the doors of the palatial hall opened, and Wake of Ruin himself walked in, looking as tall and gaunt as ever. A subtle scent of rot and slaughter followed the old man like an invisible mantle. Saint Cor was wearing an austere military uniform that had an insignia of 4 stars emblazoned on its sleeve. His sharp, pale face was framed by unruly raven-black hair, and his dark eyes were staring at them with bleak dullness. When he looked at Jet, however, a hint of cold fondness appeared in the weathered lines of his unfriendly face. Soul Reaper ascended Sunless, "Welcome." His voice was hoarse and a bit grating. They had both stood up when the Saint walked in, so he gestured for them to sit. Then, Wake of Ruin took a chair opposite them. "How did your last mission go?" They glanced at each other. Jet was the one to respond. "It was all right, sir. We scouted out a corrupted tyrant, met up with the wolves and the Night Singer, and helped them take the creature down. Casualties were minimal." He nodded, seemingly indifferent to the news of a powerful creature being slain, which was only expected. As the field commander of the entire operation, Saint Cor must have been receiving reports like this quite frequently. His next question, however, was a bit surprising. "How do you like it in the SRU?" Jet lingered for a moment. "I like it just fine, sir." The old man shifted his gaze, subjecting Sunny to a piercing stare. "What about you, young man?" Sunny shifted uncomfortably, suspecting that there was a hidden meaning to the question. He shrugged. "I feel like it's a good fit for my abilities." Wake of Ruin studied him for a few seconds, then nodded. "Good, you've performed admirably as advanced scouts. However, it's a waste of your talents." Both Sunny and Jet straightened, looking at the Saint with slightly startled expressions. Noticing their reaction, the old man remained impassive. "Consider yourself reassigned effective immediately. The proper paperwork is already being delivered to the SRU headquarters." "And what?" Sunny stared. Just like that, they got a new job, without even being asked. Jet cleared her throat. There were many questions burning in Sunny's mind, but she asked the most important one. "Sorry, sir, but reassigned to where?" Saint Cor stared at her for a moment, then pointed to himself. "My personal retinue. That's officially. Unofficially, however, you'll be acting as special envoys assigned to the Legacy forces. Each of you will be a contact person between the evacuation army and the great clans." Sunny suddenly hated how opulent and lavish the spacious hall was. He frowned. "With all due respect, sir, I get it why Ascended Jet might be considered a good candidate for such a position, but what do I have to do with any of it? Surely, you must know that my relationship with the great clans is a bit rocky. That is not even mentioning whether I want the job or not." He had spent 6 months hiding in the waking world to avoid the wrath of clan valor, after all. Had the old saint gone senile, or what? Wake of Ruin turned his heavy gaze back to Sunny, and calmly raised an eyebrow. "On the contrary, I think that you are the best person for the job," ascended Sunless. "You are quite close to one of the leaders of the Valor delegation, no?" Sunny tilted his head a little. "That depends on who that leader is, I guess." St. Cor smiled slightly. The smile made his gaunt, pale face look even more unnerving. The old man glanced at an antiquated wristwatch adorning his hand and then said, his voice sounding cold and aloof, "Why, it's young Lady Nephi's of Valor, the changing star, of course." He looked away from the watch and added matter-of-factly, "She'll be arriving alongside Valor's other emissaries soon. Actually, I think they'll be there in a few minutes. Sunny's eyes widened. I certainly knew that Neff was coming to Antarctica, but why is Wake of Ruin calling her one of the Lee Huh? What? In a few minutes. Sunny stared at the veteran saint, dumbfounded. He had been anticipating meeting Neff again for a long time, but now that it was mere minutes away, his thoughts were in disarray. Did she check out my runes recently? Does she know that I'm a tyrant now too? Wait, no. Why do I care if she knows or not? I shouldn't. Jet seemed a little surprised too. Weren't they supposed to arrive in a couple of days? St. Cor shrugged. They were, but with Tyrus receiving some free time due to the three of us being beaten black and blue in the last battle, the schedule has been moved up. Ascended Sunless, and you arrived just in time. Sunny tried to digest the information. He knew that the legacy reinforcements would be coming in 2 waves. The second one consisted of the bulk of their forces, traveling by sea, while the first one was supposed to be the vanguard and consisted of just a few people. They were going to travel to Antarctica through the Dream Realm. The process was both simple and complicated. They needed a saint who had already established a tether in the southern quadrant, in this case, Saint Tyrus. The members of the vanguard had to either already be anchored in the same citadel as she or be brought there by a different transcendent. Then Sky Tide would be able to bring them with her to the waking world, thus transporting the necessary people to Antarctica. The vanguard had to be small because saints were limited in how many living creatures they could carry with them between the 2 worlds, just like masters were limited in how much inanimate weight they could bring. Usually, a saint could only transport 1 or 2 people at a time, and that consumed a fair amount of essence. Coming to a sudden realization, Sunny looked around. He was starting to understand why such a lavish place was chosen for their impromptu meeting. The opulence of the Grand Hall was not for the benefit of 2 ascended. Wake of Ruin was rolling out the red carpet for the powerhouses of the great clans. He looked at the old man, thinking. St. Cor smiled. I'm starting to suspect that you are not of a very high opinion about the great legacy clans, young man. Sunny gritted his teeth, trying to hide contempt and anger from seeping into his gaze. That is putting it lightly, sir. The old man studied him with a bit of curiosity. Why? Sunny gathered his thoughts, trying to come up with a convenient answer. Eventually, he said evenly. I guess it boils down to the fact that they are traitors. Wake of Ruin raised an eyebrow. Traitors interesting, how so? Sunny sighed. Awakened are supposed to be humanity's sword against the spell, no. The legacies are the greatest of the awakened, and yet they have seemingly given up on challenging the spell. Much worse, they refused to come out of the sheath when we needed them. This whole disaster could have been salvaged if they had done their duty. He had not mentioned the millions of people who had died in the Antarctic Center, and neither had he mentioned the tens of thousands of soldiers that perished with them. He doubted that such numbers could touch the heart of St. Cor. The old man was one of the leaders of the government, after all. People like him viewed the world in terms of billions of lives, spread across many decades. If Sunny told him that he was burning with anger toward the great clans because of the death of just 3 awakened, the old man would have probably thought him crazy. Wake of Ruin sighed. I see. Indeed, as long as you know anything about the world, it is easy to dislike the great clans. It is even easier to dislike them if you know a lot. But forgive me for sounding like a grumpy old man, ascended Sunless. Young people like you really lack perspective. Sunny looked at him somberly. Do we? St. Cor nodded. It's not your fault, of course. One hand to be there and live through the worst of it to understand. You see, ascended Sunless, and you too, Jet, people of your age were born in a stable world. It might be a cruel world and a harsh world, but it is a stable one nevertheless, because it has been built that way by your predecessors. Many tend to look at the flaws of the world, but very few stop to question its foundations. And those foundations, why, they might have been better, but they could have also been so much worse. He leaned back in his chair, looking into the distance with a neutral expression. The fact of the matter is that the great clans emerged from the chaos of the past, but they weren't the only ones fighting for power and dominance back then. There were other clans, other forces, and people with entirely different ideas about what the world should become. The things they did. It is a blessing, really, that those old monsters were buried in the past, and that the great clans ended up victorious. So, yes, you lack perspective. Sonny frowned. Other forces, different ideas. No offense, sir, but you have some nerve saying such things to two people who grew up in the outskirts. Others might now feel the same way, but we enjoyed the premium experience of living in this stable world you praise so much. I struggle to imagine what ideas could have been worse. St. Cor looked at him coldly, then suddenly laughed. His laughter sounded like the caws of a hungry raven. Ah, you are a direct person. Ascended Sunless, I like it. He looked at Sonny with his dark, harsh eyes, the hint of mirth that had appeared in them for a moment dissipating without a trace. The gaunt old man shook his head. But you should make an effort to imagine it. A dying world ravaged by war. People who had all but forgotten how to be proper humans. And then, an even bigger disaster, but one that presented a great opportunity. An opportunity for some of them to become unimaginably powerful, unmistakably superior. Entirely unrestrained and all but unstoppable, free to make whatever they wanted from this new era. Freedom, young man, freedom can be the most appalling curse in the world if it falls into the wrong hands. It is a terrifying thing. Wake of Ruin grew silent for a few moments, and then smiled sarcastically. Here I go rambling again. Jet, you should have stopped me. In any case, our guests should be arriving any second now. The emissaries of valor will come first, and the emissaries of song will follow in a few hours. Help me welcome them, you two. He paused, then looked at Sonny and added in a neutral tone. For better or worse, the great clans are all we have now. We'll need their help to see this operation through, so keep that in mind, young man. Sonny lingered for a bit, then reluctantly nodded. I can play nice, or at least pretend to play nice. We'll see how it goes. Before Sonny could answer, the atmosphere in the lavish hall seemed to change slightly. It was as though a wave of invisible energy rolled through it, making the air feel colder and sharper. Wake of Ruin sighed and turned around, looking at the empty space in the middle of the spacious chamber. It had been empty before, but now 4 people were standing on the lacquered floor, surrounded by the scent of the dream realm. For a moment, it felt as though they were simply a memory of a forgotten nightmare. But then, the feeling disappeared and they were simply there. It was not often that Sonny saw saints enter the waking world, and he had to admit that it was an eerie thing to witness. Were awakened and mundane people as startled when he suddenly appeared out of thin air in front of them. That idle thought streaked across his mind and disappeared without a trace when Sonny realized who exactly he was looking at. His eyes widened slightly. 4 people, and by coincidence he knew each of them. The first one was Sky Tide. The saint of the White Feather clan appeared as she always did, tall, slender, with a posture like that of an arrow. She wore a light armor of lustrous steel, and her hair fell like a cascade of pale gold. Tyrus looked austere and beautiful, but also slightly inhuman because of her strange amber eyes and vertical pupils. She stood apart from the other 3, who all wore intricate suits of lusterless black armor. The first of the 3 immediately attracted Sonny's gaze. His heart moved slightly. Nephi's looked different in the colors of House Valor. The black armor created a striking contrast against her ivory skin, silver hair, and cool gray eyes. She looked like a beautiful dark spirit that took the form of a deadly night to sow the seeds of discord and ruin in the mortal world. The second person was Morgan of Valor. Every time Sonny saw her, He was unnerved by how much she resembled her older brother, however. Although Morgan and Mordred looked very much like reflections of each other, her demeanor was entirely different. Morgan had black wavy hair and alabaster skin. Her suit of armor was adorned by a vermilion cape, which was the same vibrant color as her vivid scarlet eyes. Her entire being radiated the feeling of lethal sharpness, as if she was a living blade. However, it was the third person that made Sonny's eyes widen in guarded shock. He was a tall and severe man, with sharp facial features and even sharper eyes. His hair was black as Morgan's. In fact, there was a lot of familiar likeness between them, and touched by silver at the temples. His strong figure radiated an almost palpable feeling of authority and pressure, and his steely blue eyes were calm and piercing. The armor he wore was simpler than that of the other two, as though the man did not need its protection. A deep frown appeared on Sonny's face. "Saint Madoc, what the hell is he doing here?" Indeed, the man was none other than Saint Madoc, the Whispering Blade, brother of Anvil and the nominal leader of the great clan Valor. As Sonny watched, Sir Madoc turned his head and smiled calmly, somehow making his smile look both friendly and demanding submission. Wake of Ruin. The gaunt old man was standing in front of Sonny and Jet, staring at the newcomers with a neutral expression. He lingered for a moment before saying in his hoarse voice, "Whispering Blade, I have to admit your appearance is a bit of a surprise." Madoc's pleasant smile widened slightly. "Isn't it only right for me to be here? My clan announced its full support for the brave men and women of the evacuation army. That, of course, includes my personal assistance." Sonny tried to read the silent conversation that was happening between the two transcendents. Surely, their words had other meanings. Saint Cor was probably trying to understand why the sovereign had gone as far as to send his own brother to Antarctica. Madoc, in turn, was letting him know that Anvil was putting a lot of importance into what was about to happen in the southern quadrant. Whispering Blade laughed slightly, then raised his hand. "However, you shouldn't be addressing me. I'm just here to offer support and make sure that nothing untoward happens. The true leader of this expedition is my niece, Morgan. She will be in charge of everything." She gestured toward Morgan, and then threw an even gaze at Nephi's. "And of course my other niece will be supporting her in this endeavor. I trust you know Changing Star. The three of us are the vanguard of the Valor force." Wake of Ruin remained silent for a few moments, then nodded slowly toward Morgan. "In that case, welcome to Antarctica, Lady Morgan, Lady Nephi's." He threw a heavy glance toward Whispering Blade, and then said evenly, "How curious that there are two saints in your group, as well as the granddaughter of Immortal Flame, and yet all three of you seem to be subordinated to a young woman with no known achievements to her name. Some could see it as a sign that Valor is not taking this matter seriously." Morgan looked at the fearsome transcendent, and then smiled. It seemed that his barely disguised provocation had no effect on her whatsoever. Her voice was calm and indifferent. "You are mistaken, Saint Cor. Clan Valor takes this matter extremely seriously, which is why I have been entrusted with considerable power and authority." Wake of Ruin sighed. "Forgive this old man for being frank, Lady Morgan, but what kind of authority can a mere ascended wield? I have half a dozen titans wandering the continent and 27 cities to protect. What can you actually do to alleviate my problems?" Morgan shrugged silently and then took a step back. Madoc, Tyrus, and Nephi's remained motionless as a whirlwind of sparks suddenly filled the spacious hall. "What the?" As Sonny watched, an echo manifested from the hurricane of sparks, and then another, and then another. 3, 6, 12, 15. A few moments later, the large hall suddenly did not seem as large anymore. 15 harrowing nightmare creatures filled it, each giving off a sense of vast and dreadful power. Sonny stared, suddenly feeling cold. "Transcendent, They are all transcended echoes. How many thousands of corrupted nightmare creature had to be slaughtered to produce these echoes? The weakest of them was a transcendent demon, while the most powerful was a transcendent tyrant. And that was only what Morgan had chosen to show, who knew what she kept hidden. The Princess of War smiled politely as she looked at Wake of Ruin. These are my credentials. Are you satisfied, Transcendent Core? 15 transcendent echoes, most of them devils. Sunny simply stared, mentally recalculating the threat level of the Valor Force and of the great clans in general. I knew, of course, that the hidden power of the sovereigns is vast, but it seems that I've been concentrating on their personal might too much, mostly because it is both mysterious and phenomenal. However, there is the mundane power of accumulation as well. I've been a fool to neglect it. To everyone else, a corrupted abomination was a dreadful nightmare, even to saints. Transcendents fought against the corrupted and were more than capable of slaying them, but every such fight was a risk, especially against the creatures of higher classes. The Supremes, however, were equal to the great nightmare creatures. Sunny had been under the impression that the sovereigns mostly stayed within the confines of their domains, but maybe he was not entirely right. Someone like Anvil or Kai Song could slaughter corrupted abominations with the same ease he could butcher awakened creatures. It only made sense that they had accumulated a legion of powerful echoes over the decades, including scores of transcendent ones. Sunny suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. Hell, who says that transcendent echoes are the limit? Since the sovereigns could fight on equal footing with great nightmare creatures, then didn't it mean that they could possess supreme echoes as well? To this day, Sunny had only seen two great abominations. One was the unborn spawn of the vile thieving bird, and the other, most likely, was the dark sea of the forgotten shore. What would it look like if a creature like that was turned into an echo? Was Morgan in possession of a supreme echo? Did she have an echo of a titan slumbering in her soul sea? He lingered for a moment, then glanced at Nephi's, who stood in front of the army of monsters with an impassive expression on her calm, beautiful face. You want to destroy this? He closed his eyes for a moment. Damn that lunatic. She must have infected me with her madness, because I really want to make these bastards pay too. At this point, it was hard to say whose madness was more virulent. Sunny shook his head, then looked at Wake of Ruin, who was staring at Morgan with an unreadable expression. Eventually, the old man said in an even voice, "Put those things away, they'll ruin the floors." What? Morgan tilted her head a little and silently dismissed the echoes. Saint Cor nodded. Good, I see that your clan is as shrewd as ever. These echoes will be of great help, if used correctly, of course. Sunny was thinking feverishly. Saint Tyrus is a vassal of Valor, but the reinforcements they sent are all direct members of the clan. Maddock, Morgan Nephi's, and one more saint, who is escorting the main force across the ocean. With these 15 transcendent abominations, they alone could be considered on par with the entire evacuation army, if not more powerful than us. And the forces of Song will be just as powerful. There was already one saint of the Song clan in East Antarctica, a vassal, just like Sky Tide. Two more were coming, both direct members of the clan, as well as several hundred awakened and several powerful masters. Who would these people be? What hidden aces would they bring along? Is that guy coming? Surely he was. Mordred had joined Song to avenge himself on Valor in the first place. He wouldn't miss a chance to make his former clan bleed. The Prince of Nothing alone was more frightening than 15 transcendent echoes. Sunny almost groaned. These bastards are going to destroy the entire continent. Even though Antarctica was meant to be merely a prologue to the War of the Great Clans, that prologue was already promising to be the most chilling of disasters. It would be a cataclysm. Everyone in the hall must have understood the magnitude of the approaching collision. However, no one seemed rattled by it. Wake of Ruin and Jet seemed a bit somber, but calm, too jaded to be shaken by the promise of appalling bloodshed. St. Tyrus was reserved and stoic. Maddock and Morgan, they hid it well, but Sunny could see bloodlust and readiness in their eyes. As for Nephi's, she appeared the calmest of them all. She might have fooled everyone else, but he knew what kind of hatred dwelled in her burning, murderous heart. The more the members of the great clans killed each other, the more exhilarated she would be. As he thought about the grim prospects of the nearest future, Morgan looked around with curiosity. Her voice had a hint of anticipation in it. I see that our colleagues from the Great Clan Song have not arrived yet. Wake of Ruin nodded. Indeed, they'll only be here in a few hours. Really, that makes things awkward for me. There is a lot we need to discuss regarding the current situation on the continent and your future role in keeping it in human hands. But what am I supposed to do? Repeat myself all over again when the Song Vanguard arrives? He shook his head with resignation. Sunny could just imagine that war meeting. 3 sides discussing important matters of strategy, with everyone present perfectly aware of the fact that most of the gathered powerhouses were actually planning to kill each other, and with the few bystanders only wondering about how to make them kill each other in the most convenient way. All the while pretending not to know anything, of course. What a joke! It was really funny. He barely held back laughter. At that moment, St. Cor suddenly threw a glance toward Jet and Sunny. His grating voice resounded in the spacious hall. So, make yourself comfortable for the moment. We'll convene when the other party arrives. These are 2 of my best people, by the way, Ascended Jet and Ascended Sunless. You all know Soul Reaper, so I won't say anything. Young Master Sunless, however, has only earned his reputation recently. The soldiers are calling him the Devil of Antarctica, from what I hear. The veteran saint chuckled. A fitting nickname if I ever heard one. In any case, these 2 will be my envoys for your 2 great clans. Timeliness has to be rewarded, so pick one. I'll send the other to accompany the Song people. Both Sunny and Jet stared at him, not sure how to feel about being handled that way. It was as if they were livestock. A precious livestock, but still. What a rude bastard. Sunny turned to look at the emissaries of valor, frowning slightly. Morgan glanced at him, then studied Jet for a while. Eventually she smiled. Why, we'll take Master Sunless. He's my dear sister's former companion after all. I feel like we're good friends. Sunny found himself in a very strange situation. He was left alone with 3 emissaries of the great clan Valor, Changing Star, Morgan, and Whispering Blade himself. 2 of the most powerful people in the world were right there in front of him, speaking with each other casually. And of course, Nephi's was there too. The waiting room they had been led to was comfortable and spacious. Food and refreshments had been served by the staff members, and it seemed as if the 4 of them were having a friendly get-together back in NQSC. The only difference was that everyone was wearing armor, well, except for Sunny himself. Still, he fit right in with the members of Clan Valor due to his black tunic. He sighed. Speak about strange bedfellows. That is what they call sleeping with the enemy. Wait, neither of these sentences sound right. Lamenting the poor sense of whoever had come up with these idioms, Sunny reached for a plate and loaded it with all kinds of food. Supplies were a sore point for the evacuation army, but Wake of Ruin must have decided to go all out today. There were a lot of things on the table that would have been almost impossible to procure anywhere in Antarctica, except maybe on the black market. The pile of food attracted the attention of Morgan, who observed him for a few moments, and then raised an eyebrow. Her vermilion eyes had a hint of amusement in them. Are you very hungry, Master Sunless? He glanced at her somberly, then shook his head. Well, if you must know, I spent the last couple of weeks in the wilderness, scouting out the migration routes of a horde of nightmare creatures. Then, I had to lend a hand in a battle against a corrupted tyrant and came to meet you pretty much immediately after that. But no, I'm not that hungry." He leaned back and raised his heavy plate. "However, one of the first things Antarctica teaches you is to eat when you can. Who knows when I'll have a chance to have a proper meal again." Whispering Blade chuckled. "So, not too different from subjugating the dream realm then. Morgan is a bit too young to remember, but back when human territory was actively expanding, it wasn't rare for a Waken to spend years in hellish conquests of untamed regions. Good food was more precious than soul shards." The saint looked at his niece with an outwardly benevolent expression and smiled. Morgan grimaced, then sighed. "What a frustrating day. Everyone seems inclined to point out how young and inexperienced I am." Sonny made himself busy chewing. At the same time, he sent Nephi's a mental question through the blessing of dusk. "What's up with them?" She showed no sign of having heard him, playing her part perfectly. However, a moment later, he received a response. "Don't mind their games. They're just playing. It only helps Morgan to be seen as an inexperienced beneficiary of nepotism, and for Maddox to be seen as an envious man who is full of bitter resentment toward his younger brother. In truth, she is probably the more formidable of the two, and Valor's unity is like a monolith." Sonny poured himself a cup of strong coffee. "More formidable of the two, really." Nephi's was looking in the window. "Not in terms of combat power, but she is young. Once Morgan becomes a saint, Maddox, or any other saint perhaps, won't stand a chance against her. That makes me feel a bit better, actually. So I'm not too much of a loser for being crushed by her in less than 40 seconds. Their short duel in the dreamscape was still fresh in his memory. The exchange of thoughts with Nephi's only took a couple seconds. It was just enough time for Morgan to turn to her and ask, "What about you, sister? Do you perhaps consider me unworthy of leading this expedition as well?" "Well, it's true that I'm not quite as distinguished of a leader as my dear sister. Do you think you should have been in charge instead?" As Sonny shifted uncomfortably, Neff looked at Morgan, calmly held her gaze for a couple of moments, and then said in an even tone, "If I wanted to be in charge, I would have been." The heiress of Valor fell silent, then suddenly laughed. "Ah, that is why I like you, changing star. Am I not blessed to suddenly get such a wonderful little sister?" Although she was smiling, her eyes remained sharp as a cold blade. Morgan looked away from Nephi's and turned her attention to Sonny. "I hear that a lot has happened to you after we last met, Master Sunless. The devil of Antarctica, it has a nice ring to it. Who would have thought that such a pleasant young man would earn such a fearsome reputation? It does make me regret the fact that you had turned down the invitation to enter Clan Valor, though." Sonny glanced at her over his plate and smiled. "I am not going to lie, I did regret that decision myself, a couple of times." Then he shrugged and turned his attention back to the food. "However, what's done is done. And hey, that's fate for you. Despite everything, we are still going to end up fighting side by side. And maybe even against each other. When that happens, your regret will only grow." Morgan nodded. When she spoke, her voice sounded a little cold. "Indeed, life is truly unpredictable. The first time we met, it was because you had caused a certain person to escape his prison and played a role in the death of one of Valor's saints. And now, we might be seeing that person very soon, and you are enjoying a meal with me. What a funny turn of events." Sonny looked at her for a few moments, then shook his head. "You're right, it's kind of funny. However, you are wrong if you think that we'll see that guy. Knowing him, you won't see him coming up until the moment he plunges a knife in your back." Whispering Blade's face slowly grew dark. Looking at Sonny, he said in a neutral tone, "From your words, It's hard to understand whether you despise that abomination or admire him, ascended Sunless. Sunny laughed. No matter how I feel about that guy, the point is, I would prefer to do it from a distance. St. Maddox studied him for a moment, then nodded. Wise. Hearing that, Morgan chuckled. Indeed. Then, Master Sunless, let's wait and see how good your luck is. After that, all casualness drained from Morgan's voice. When she looked at Nephi's, her face was just like it had been the moment she tore Sunny's heart apart in the dreamscape, cold and sharp, emanating a sense of lethal danger without her even trying to. How much does he know? Hearing that question, Neph shrugged slightly. Her answer was simple. Enough. Morgan sighed, then smiled from the corner of her mouth. I see, that makes it easier. I'll speak comfortably then. Sunny studied the two of them for a few moments, then asked with a bit of curiosity in his voice. Really, aren't you concerned that I'll report everything you say to Saint Cor? Whispering Blade chuckled. He was mostly keeping silent before, but it was impossible to mistake him for a passive observer. Just by sitting there, the elder of Clan Valor radiated a sense of overwhelming, domineering power. It was as though he owned this room, or every room he found himself in, rather. St. Maddox glanced at Sunny with indifference. So what if you do? And that was it. That was all he had to say to make Sunny understand that Whispering Blade did not care if Wake of Ruin knew all about their conversations. Not because there was nothing to hide, but simply because the government was not anywhere near being in a position to act on such information. It was irrelevant. Sunny suddenly felt a compulsion to cut the indifference off the saint's face with the blade of the sin of solace. However, he did not let any of it show on his face. Instead, Sunny smiled pleasantly and nodded. Makes sense. Sorry, it was a stupid question. Morgan leaned back, considering something. Eventually, she said, whether that person comes or not is unclear. However, the rest of the force the Queen of Worms has sent is all but confirmed by now. It's good to know who we are dealing with, but there were some last-minute changes. We must be ready to adjust our strategy accordingly. The Queen of Worms. Sunny wondered if that was Kai Song's true name, her title, or simply a derisive nickname Valor had given her. Morgan and Whispering Blade were seemingly ignoring his presence, speaking mostly for Neph's benefit. They were both looking at her, at least. St. Maddox's voice was a bit listless. One of her vassal saints, Dire Fang, has been here in the southern quadrant for a while now. He is a ferocious fighter, but we don't need to be too concerned about him. Sky Tide alone will be enough to keep the brute in check. He lingered for a moment, then added, but the other two are Kai Song's daughters. They are worthy of our concern. We already knew that Silent Stalker is escorting their awakened across the ocean. She is a dangerous one. Stalker is a huntress, so she is both strong and cunning. Dealing with her will be hard, but we can manage that as well. Whispering Blade looked at Nephi's and Morgan heavily. However, it is the third one that we must be wary of. Beastmaster. That demoness is the true horror in terms of personal power. I alone am her equal. Even then, that depends on the battlefield. Here in Antarctica, she will have a tremendous advantage. Sunny, who had been keeping his mouth shut, finally couldn't help himself and asked, how so? St. Maddox spared him a glance. For whatever reason, he even decided to answer. Both Silent Stalker and Beastmaster are Song's adopted daughters, however, not all of them are the same. Stalker is deadly, but Beastmaster is more than that. She is one of the most feared saints in the world. That is because she is an enchantress of sorts. Beastmaster can enthrall people. Much worse, she can also enthrall beasts and even nightmare creatures. I hope I don't have to explain how such a power can be advantageous here in Antarctica. Sunny grew quiet. That was right. Maddox didn't have to explain. With myriads of abominations flooding the continent, A saint with the power to subjugate them would be a nightmare to fight against. Who needs transcendent echoes when you can have corrupted creatures serving you? Still, there had to be a limit to Beastmaster's power. No one was invulnerable. Suddenly, Nephi sent him a mental message. "What do you think?" Sunny sighed. He knew a bit about Dire Fang, the vassal saint of song who had been sent to the southern quadrant at the start of the campaign. He was a savage and tremendously lethal fighter, and also an aloof and reticent loner. In terms of power, Sunny would have put him above Cormac, but below Tyrus. So then, the opposing forces were like this. On one side there were Dire Fang and two adopted daughters of Kai Song, Silent Stalker and Beastmaster. There was also Mordred, most likely. On the other side there were Saint Tyrus, Whispering Blade, and one more transcendent of clan valor. Since Madoc did not mention the latecomer, that person must not have been on the same level as him, perhaps comparable to Silent Stalker. There were also Morgan and Nephi's. And Cassie. People who underestimated the unassuming blind girl were doomed to end up in early graves. He lingered for a moment, then responded. "It seems like the odds are stacked slightly in Valor's favor." Nephi's looked at him calmly. "I agree, and that is precisely why we should feel nervous." Sunny blinked. "Us? Since when do I care about what Song has in store for Valor?" Granted, he was a special envoy now. He would be accompanying the forces of Valor across East Antarctica and maybe even beyond. That put him in a wonderful position to keep an eye on the actions of the great clan. But it also meant that should Song stage a sudden attack on their enemy, he would be directly in the way. But what exactly are they hiding in their sleeve? At that moment, Morgan suddenly looked at him and said, her voice tinged with a bit of curiosity. "Oh, there's also going to be a third daughter, an ascended Song Sation. Little is known about her, considering that she had spent close to a decade lost in the dream realm. The two of you would know her better than me since she also comes from the Forgotten Shore. So, what is she like?" Sunny and Nephi's glanced at each other, feeling unease. After a few moments of silence, he answered, "Trouble. If I had to describe her with one word, it would be that she's trouble." Before too long, it was time to meet the emissaries of Song. Sunny found himself feeling a bit curious. After all, he was not too familiar with the great clan that ruled the northwest reaches of the human territories in the Dream Realm. By all accounts, the Song clan was no less storied and powerful than Valor. Its foundation had not been as great, but after Kai Song rose to prominence and became one of the first humans to transcend, the power of her clan utterly eclipsed that of the older, better established legacy families. As far as Sunny could remember knowing anything, Clan Song was one of the three most exalted powers in the world. Their influence spread far and wide, and their home in the Dream Realm, Ravenheart, an ancient palace built between the snowy peaks and smoldering volcanoes of an impregnable mountain chain, was universally considered one of the great citadels of humanity. With a population rivaling that of Bastion, Ravenheart was a beautiful and severe place from what Sunny knew. Strangely enough, it was not nearly as popular and well known as the colossal castle that Clan Valor ruled. In fact, the whole great clan Song was a little mysterious. The image of Bastion was etched into the minds of all humans by countless dramas and films, with countless stories of romance and valor taking place in its stone walls. The land of snow and ash where Clan Song ruled, however, was rarely depicted, and when it was always to show something distant and exotic. Whether it was because Kai Song did not care about mundane fame, or because Anvil put more effort into building the public image of his clan, Sunny did not know. He did, however, know that through pure coincidence, his own path had also mostly crossed with the representatives of Clan Valor. Valor were the ones in control of the northernmost territory carved out by humanity in the Dream Realm, where it brushed against the Hollow Mountains, and so That was where he had gone after becoming an awakened. From the sanctuary of Noctis to the Night Temple, Sunny had met many servants of Anvil of Valor, killing some of them, and then had the misfortune of meeting the Sovereign Sun in the flesh. With the complications that followed, it was fair to say that he knew Valor pretty well. The same could not be said about Song, though all his experience with that domain was limited to having met Sation in the Dark City. Even then, Sunny was not at all close with the former leader of the Handmaidens, so it was not like she had shared stories of her clan with him. So naturally, Sunny was curious. His curiosity was mixed with a bit of dread, though. They entered the spacious reception hall once again. This time, it was Wake of Ruin who had been waiting there for some time, speaking quietly with Jet. The staff member who had escorted Sunny and the emissaries of Valor tactfully disappeared, and the gaunt saint greeted them with a curt nod. "You're here, I hope you rested well. There is a lot to discuss, so we probably won't be sleeping tonight." Whispering Blade smiled coldly. "I wouldn't dream of it." Sunny blinked a couple of times, startled. Was that a pun? By the dead gods, I hope it wasn't. The conversation died before receiving the chance to start, because right at that moment, something imperceptible seemed to change in the world. A cold breeze blew through the hall, and then 4 people were standing in the middle of it, just like the 4 emissaries of Valor had a few hours ago. Sunny involuntarily held his breath. He had seen Dire Fang from afar once, some time ago. The grim man had not changed much, except for the fact that there were ugly bruises and half-healed lacerations on his body this time. He was of medium height, with an angular face and powerful muscles rippling under his dusky skin. The Transcendent wore a sleeveless vest that left his broad shoulders and powerful arms exposed. His hair was dark and disheveled, like the fur of a wild beast. A thick beard covered the lower part of his gloomy face, and his eyes were harsh and piercing. Saint Dire Fang emanated a feeling of wildness, savage power, and ferocity, as if the world turned a little more primal wherever he appeared. Dangerous. Sunny studied the man for a moment, then turned his attention to the next newcomer. His heart trembled. The woman standing next to Dire Fang was not outwardly seductive, but for whatever reason she seemed almost irresistibly alluring. Where Whispering Blade was dignified and domineering, she was breathtaking and tantalizing. She was tall, with fair skin and red, sensual lips. Her cold beauty was only made more striking by her inviting dark eyes, which were full of strength and willpower. Beastmaster had long hair that fell like a waterfall of black silk and wore a simple dress of carmine fabric, which nevertheless looked regal and mesmerizing on her slender figure. Her face was a little aloof and a little humorous. It was a kind of face one never wanted to look away from. Sunny felt a pang of fear when he saw her. Now, he understood why Madoc had called her a demoness. The daughter of Kai Song did, indeed, resemble a beautiful demon, even if he had not known that she was one of the most terrifying saints in existence. He would have felt it, simply from the fact that he immediately wanted to discard that knowledge and step closer to her. Snap out of it. Maybe Sunny would have fallen for Beastmaster's enchanting beauty if he was young and inexperienced, but after meeting beings like Solvin and Hope, he was somewhat immune to such charms. He shifted his gaze to Song Sation, also known as Blood Lord, to distract himself from the enticing visage of Beastmaster. Bad idea. Now that she had become a master, Sation's exotic beauty was even more striking. Hers was a different kind of beauty, though. It was poised, reserved, graceful, and exquisite. Sation was one of the awakened whose appearance had been changed by their aspect. Her skin was of a strange gray color, which made her look both inhuman and riveting. However, Sunny could not forget her other, monstrous face. He had seen her transform into a hideous creature during the siege of the Crimson Spire, after all. And even before that, he had seen what her victims looked like after being drained of blood. He sighed mentally. Monsters, beautiful monsters. Are all of Kai Song's adopted daughters like that? What the hell has she done to them? And speaking of monsters, finally he looked at the fourth member of Song's vanguard. It was a middle-aged man in heavy armor, his face bleak and unfamiliar. His eyes, however, were perfectly human, with not even a hint of a mad prince hiding in their depths. Sunny frowned. Yeah, I am not fooled. There's no chance that Mordred would miss on an opportunity to come and wage war against Valor. It's you, isn't it, bastard? He lingered for a few moments, and then addressed the bleak man. Long time no see. The bleak man looked back at him, a masterfully crafted expression of confusion appearing on his face. His lips parted in a polite smile. I am sorry, I don't think we've met. The smile almost looked mocking. Sunny shook his head, then looked away. Wake of Ruin frowned slightly. His grating voice sounded a little irritated. Now that everyone is here, let's skip the introductions. I extend my gratitude to the elders of the great clan Valor and the great clan Song for coming to our aid in the time of need. Come, let's start. We need to discuss the war. Sunny had been relying on Army Command to keep him alive for about half a year now, but weirdly enough, he had never been to the actual headquarters of the evacuation army. To be fair, Army Command had no definite location. It was spread across many siege capitals, strongholds, and even continents, all of them connected into a seamless network both by technology and aspect abilities of the awakened officers. Most of the staff was here in Antarctica, like the members of the department where Kim was currently working, but not all of them. That said, the underground fortress below the building where the reception hall was located seemed like the closest thing to the heart of Army Command. It was a hive of activity, with countless people, both mundane and awakened, hurrying feverishly to accomplish a myriad of tasks in a timely manner. Their work might not have seemed as dire as what the soldiers on the front lines were going through, but it was nevertheless just as vital. Without efficient and timely support and management, the evacuation campaign would be doomed to end in a bloody disaster. From updating the status of various areas in relation to the strength of the call in them, to compiling data about countless nightmare creatures and guiding troop movements, Army Command was the brain of the army. Without the brain, the body would be utterly useless. Somewhere in here, there was also an office where the allocation of contribution points was decided. In any other circumstances, Sunny would have felt his heart start to beat faster, but right now, he was fully concentrating on something else. His eyes were glued to the bleak man, who was walking behind Beastmaster and Sation, while acting perfectly unassuming, or at least as unassuming as a master could be. Army Command was, indeed, absolutely vital to the war effort. It was also a treasure trove of access and information. It would certainly be a shame if a particular psychopath got loose in its very heart. But what can I do? Sunny might have known who Mordred was and what he was capable of, but as far as stopping the Prince of Nothing went, there was little to be done, which was both unnerving and incredibly frustrating. Luckily, Sunny was not alone in his frustration. Morgan and Maddock also threw somber glances at the unassuming master from time to time, their eyes cold and sharp. Sky Tide had a complicated expression on her usually stoic face, as well. Only Nephi seemed unconcerned, and why would she be? Of the five of them, she was the only one who had never met the Prince of Nothing. She would learn to be wary of him soon, though. And probably. In truth, their goals were closely aligned. There was no telling what Changing Star would do if she met Mordred face to face. Actually, the same went for Sunny. Despite his wariness and hostility, the Prince of Nothing was not necessarily his enemy. It was just that Sunny knew how inhumanly ruthless and blood-chillingly cruel Mordred could be if it suited his goals, and how cunning he was. That was why Sonny could not remain calm at the prospect of someone like that going on a rampage across Antarctica. Would Mordred care how many innocent people burned in the flames of his retribution? Most definitely not. But what can I do? The same question returned, gnawing at Sonny. There were many things he could do, actually, just not any that would not end in him being killed at the spot by Wake or Ruin or Beastmaster. He could prematurely start a direct clash between Song and Valor right here in the Army headquarters, even. First of all, calm down. You don't even know if that is really Mordred. The guy might really be a random master the emissaries of Song chose to bring along for whatever reason. Sonny could see the soul cores of humans and nightmare creatures, but that ability was useless against the Prince of Nothing. When Mordred possessed a body, he also possessed the soul, or at least enough of it to mimic how it was supposed to look like. Right, I shouldn't rush to conclusions. Wait for now, observe, act later. Saint Cor led them to a large chamber that was filled with all kinds of equipment to display information, much of it being updated in real time. Sonny looked curiously at a large projected map of East Antarctica, with countless symbols denoting masses of nightmare creatures moving across it in a seemingly chaotic manner. There were also numerous static marks showcasing the location of nightmare gates. He paled slightly, suddenly faced with a stark reminder of how many of them there were. The marks littered the entire map like pustules, as if the continent was being slowly devoured from the inside by a lethal disease. There were a staggering amount of them in the wilderness, but the concentration grew exponentially in the vicinity of the siege capitals. The moving symbols were all congregating toward the human settlements, too. The paths of the hordes of nightmare creatures might have seemed aimless at first, but if one looked at the bigger picture, it was painfully clear that all of them were slowly drawing closer to the 27 cities. It looked like an inescapable avalanche of death and despair, a nightmarish chain of doom and destruction that was tied around Antarctica's neck, its cold embrace becoming tighter with each day. That was what the evacuation army was facing. Feeling a chill creep up his spine, Sonny lingered for a few moments, and then glanced at the people walking in front of him. His eyes grew darker, and the shadows nestling in the corners of the strategy room grew deeper, too. Unforgivable. His hands would have turned into fists if he had not made a conscious effort to appear calm. His heart, however, was dark and heavy. Unforgivable. Even knowing what was happening in Antarctica, these mighty people had come here to make it all worse. Sonny thought back to what Wake of Ruin had said about the comparative benevolence of the great clans, trying to remember the crumbs of sense he had found in those words. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't. In a sense, it was no different from the outskirts. The whole world was like that. No one cared if you lived or died in the outskirts, and the people who had the power to help you all chose to do nothing, or at least as little as possible. In the same way, the people who held the true power were comfortable doing nothing to save the population of Antarctica. The chain of nightmares had happened in the southern quadrant, but the next time it might happen somewhere else. Then, too, they would remain indifferent. To those who lived in the outskirts, citizens seemed like people who inhabited a distant paradise. But to the great clans, the citizens were no different from the outskirt rats. Of course, one could object and argue for the other side. The government was not malicious at its core, and its treatment of the people in the outskirts was born out of necessity. The outskirts existed because the planet could not sustain the whole human population. Someone had to be sacrificed to make sure that the rest survived. Otherwise, there would not be enough resources to save anyone. And it wasn't like the unfortunate souls in the outskirts were completely abandoned. There was a constant supply of cheap synth paste, there were jobs, there was electricity, access to entertainment, and so much more. People were not being left to die. They at least had the means to survive, if only barely. It was just that their lives were more or less doomed to be short and bitterly hard. In the same way, the great clans were not entirely heartless. It was just that their plans for humanity were aimed at the dream realm and not the waking world. Even then, they made a little bit of effort. They had sent Sky Tide and Dire Fang. The House of Night might not have taken part in the ground operation, but they did supply enough saints and nightwalkers to guide the naval convoys to and from Antarctica. But still, Sonny could not forgive them. He didn't want to. All of it was a load of crap as far as he was concerned. He might have found a way to excuse the great clans if remaining passive was all that they had done, but they did not stop at that. Not only had Valor and Song abandoned Antarctica to the chain of nightmares, they even planned to use it as a private battlefield and fight each other while countless people suffered and died around them. That he could not forgive. Sonny glanced at the back of the bleak man and smiled slightly. You want to slaughter the entire clan Valor. Wonderful, slaughter them well. Then he looked at Nephi's. You want to destroy all of them. Even better, I'll cheer you on. Sonny was not a forgiving man. In fact, he was quite spiteful. Let's see how their little war goes. The strategy meeting dragged on. The emissaries of the great clans seemed to be well aware of the situation on the infected continent. In fact, they seemed to have a clearer picture of what was going on than even Sonny did. But their understanding of the nuances of the Antarctica campaign was purely theoretical in nature. Only Sky Tide and Dire Fang possessed practical knowledge of what it meant to fight against the land that was slowly being devoured by a tide of nightmares. The others were going to have to catch up fast. Still, they were not inexperienced people. Whispering Blade especially was a veteran of many wars. He had led the Knights of Valor into plenty of untamed regions of the Dream Realm, spending years in lengthy and harrowing campaigns of subjugation to expand the borders of human territory in that inhospitable world. From that perspective, it was easy to understand why Anvil had chosen his brother to helm the conquest of the tomb of Ariel. Beastmaster was at least a decade younger than Saint Madoc, but she seemed no less of a seasoned tactician. Her exalted reputation had not appeared out of nowhere, after all. The lands controlled by the Song clan might not have expanded as dramatically as those ruled by Valor in the past 2 decades, but every region they did conquer had been a much more dire hell to surmount. The tantalizing saint was surprisingly soft-spoken and cordial. Sonny had expected her to be arrogant, aloof, and unapproachable, but she was actually quite easygoing. Her husky voice was pleasant on the ear, and her red lips were quick to twist into a small but bright smile. That smile was absolutely beguiling. Sation was actually not that much younger than Beastmaster. Even though she was not a saint, she had spent more time braving the horrors of the dream realm than most transcendents. A decade of surviving on the Forgotten Shore made her more than qualified to participate in this meeting. The same went for Nephi's. She might not have remained there as long, but her singular achievement of surviving close to 2 years of solitude in one of the most dire regions of the dream realm, eventually escaping it through a nightmare seed, earned her some respect from everyone present in the strategy room. As for Morgan, no one except for Madoc knew much about her achievements and experiences, but they also did not really doubt her competence. Her mind was as sharp as her eyes, and her knowledge of warfare and strategy seemed almost supernatural. The blood of War God flowed through her veins, after all. Sonny wouldn't be surprised if the Princess of Valor ended up being the most talented strategist among them. So each of them was more than capable of absorbing the new information about the perils and nuances of the chain of nightmares at a staggering speed. Except for the unassuming bleak man, who had been introduced as Ascended Bast. Even his name was dull and unmemorable. From what had been told about him, Ascended Bast was simply a retainer of the great clan Song. He was a part of their advance party because of a rare and useful utility aspect. No one bought that explanation, though. Sunny and Jet had been relegated to the role of silent observers, but even they spoke up from time to time, answering questions or sharing their personal experiences of fighting on the front line. Bast, however, had not said a single word from the start of the meeting, remaining placidly in a corner and watching the proceedings with relaxed, aloof calmness. Like a cat playing with a mouse. Sunny had never seen a cat, but he had met a few rats in the outskirts. As far as vermin went, rats were pretty scary, so a creature that made a hobby out of hunting and torturing them must have been really terrifying. Still, there was a limit to how much he could stare at the bleak master. The discussion Wake of Ruin was having with the emissaries of the great clans was not that interesting either. Sure, many important things were being talked about, but Sunny knew most of them. The rest he could absorb by allocating a small part of his mind to the task, which was only made easier by the blessing of mind. Eventually, his eyes settled on Nephis. Sunny lingered for a while, then asked her through the mental link. "What are you planning to do?" He knew what the great clans wanted. He knew what the government wanted. He definitely knew what the nightmare creatures wanted, and he even somewhat knew what he himself wanted. Changing Star, however, was a mystery. Her endgame was absolutely clear, but here and now, Sunny was not sure what Nephis wanted to get out of Antarctica. She glanced at him briefly, then seemingly turned her attention back to the discussion of which force would be responsible for which area of East Antarctica. Her response came a few moments later and was very simple. "Survive." Sunny tilted his head a little. "Quite a sober answer coming from you. Where is the real Nephis and what have you done to her?" The corner of her mouth twitched upward. That small change was so subtle that he doubted anyone except for him noticed it. Neph lingered for a while. Eventually she spoke, or rather thought, in her usual even tone. "Sunny, don't you think that life is pretty strange?" Sunny blinked. What has gotten into her? He wasn't used to hearing such questions from Nephis. "Yes, sure, why?" She maintained her poised appearance, pretending to pay attention to the conversation about the disposition of clan forces, as she answered. "You've been through a lot in these past 6 months. The time before that must seem like a lifetime ago for you. But for me, when I wake up, I still think that I am in the nightmare sometimes. For me, it feels like I was lost in the dream realm just yesterday." Changing Star paused, then continued after a few short moments. "But I am not. I am a member of Clan Valor now. I have a citadel of my own, and dozens of awakened are ready to follow my orders. That was yesterday. Today I am in the southern quadrant, preparing to wage war both on countless nightmare creatures and on the best of Clan Song. Beastmaster is here, smiling at me politely. Whispering Blade is also here, watching my every move. All of it a bit overwhelming." She turned her head and looked at him, her clear gray eyes looking a little burdened. "So my plan is to take it one step at a time, one little step after another, until all my enemies are dead. And that is why my first step is to survive." Nephis shook her head, then looked back to the map of East Antarctica, which was currently being carved between Valor, Song, and the government. A few moments, her voice resounded in his head once again, this time tinged with a hint of amusement. "Why, do you think that surviving this mayhem will be easy? It won't. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story, and if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.